He built a $7 billion company with 10,000 pounds, then couldn't sell it. The hidden cost. A young man from Essex walked up to his father and asked for one last loan. His previous businesses had failed. His money was almost gone. His father, a banker, handed him 10,000 pounds and told him plainly, "This is the last time." That 10,000 pounds became a platform that today moves $7.2 billion in revenue every single year. It made its owner $1.4 billion in personal payouts. And by some estimates, at its peak it was generating more revenue per employee than almost any comparable business on the internet. And when the owner tried to sell it, nobody would buy it. Not even at a discount. Not because the business was broken, not because the numbers were wrong, but because of what the business actually was, and the hidden cost that came with every single dollar it made. This is the story of OnlyFans, and it is stranger than anything you've heard about it. Chapter 1. The Last Shot. Tim Stokely was a hustler in the way that only someone with nothing left to lose can be. He'd grown up in Essex, gone to a second-tier university, and spent his early 20s throwing himself at business ideas that never quite worked. A couple of adult-oriented websites that went nowhere. A matchmaking service for tradespeople that nobody used. Each one a bet that didn't pay off. By 2016, he was running out of road and running out of money. So he went to his father, who had watched all of this with the patience of a man who understood risk, and asked for one more chance. His father gave him 10,000 pounds and a very clear message. This is the last one. The business Tim built with that money was called OnlyFans, and in its very first version, it had nothing to do with what it would become. The idea was clean, even obvious, a platform where creators connected directly with their audience and got paid for it. Musicians, artists, fitness coaches, writers, fans paying creators directly, no middleman taking the majority of the cut. Creators kept 80%. The platform kept 20%. The problem was, a company called Patreon was already doing exactly that, and doing it well. So OnlyFans sat in an awkward middle ground. A good idea in a space that was already occupied. Growth was slow, the bills were real, and Tim was staring at a platform that worked technically but wasn't going anywhere fast. In 2017, quietly and without announcement, he lifted the ban on adult content. Within months, the platform was unrecognizable. Chapter 2. The Explosion. 3 to 6 adult creators flooded in almost immediately. For the first time in an industry built on intermediaries taking the majority of earnings, performers could earn directly from the people watching them. No agency taking 90%. No studio controlling the relationship. Just a creator, an audience, and a direct payment between them. Growth was steady but not yet spectacular, until March 2020 when the world shut down. And this is where everything changed. In the first month of the COVID pandemic, OnlyFans grew its user base by 75%. They were adding between 6,000 and 8,000 new creators every single day. The entire adult entertainment industry had gone dark overnight. Venues closed, productions shut down, and OnlyFans was the only place left running. It absorbed everything. Then Beyoncé name-dropped OnlyFans in a song. Traffic jumped 15% overnight from a single lyric. Cardi B followed. Mainstream culture had noticed. In August 2020, actress Bella Thorne joined the platform and made $1 million in her first 24 hours. The revenue numbers became almost hard to read without double-checking them. In 2020, the platform generated $375 million in net revenue, the 20% cut it kept after paying creators. In 2021, it was nearly $1 billion. By most measures, a platform built with 10,000 pounds was generating money at a pace that had very few comparisons in internet history. And at its peak, it was doing all of that with 46 employees. That's not a company. That's a machine. That figure, by some estimates producing more revenue per employee than many of the largest technology companies at comparable periods, tells you everything about how OnlyFans was structured and why it became both one of the most profitable and the most complicated businesses on the internet. But behind those numbers, something else was growing. Something that would quietly start eating the platform from the inside. Chapter 3. The Man Behind It. By the time the revenue numbers started going vertical, Tim Stokely was no longer the real power inside OnlyFans. In 2018, a man named Leonid Radvinsky had bought 75% of the parent company. He was the son of Ukrainian immigrants, had studied at Northwestern, and had spent his career in the adult industry building platforms and pushing growth tactics so aggressive that Microsoft once sued him over the methods he used to acquire users for one of his earlier sites. He was famously invisible. No podcast interviews, almost no photos findable online. A man who ran one of the most talked about companies in the world from a position of total, deliberate obscurity. His vision for OnlyFans was simple and completely focused. The platform existed to make money. His money. Over the following years, he paid himself $1.4 billion in dividends from a business that continued operating with those same 46 employees. And while that was happening, the thing that made the platform work was starting to rot. As the biggest creators scaled, they couldn't keep up with the volume of direct messages coming in. The money on OnlyFans wasn't just in content, it was in the parasocial relationships, the sense that a fan had a direct personal connection with the person they were paying. But at scale, that connection became impossible to maintain genuinely. So, an entire shadow industry appeared. Agencies managing creator accounts on behalf of the creators themselves. Operators whose job was to maintain the impression of a direct personal connection while keeping transactions flowing for as long as possible. The New York Times reported on this practice in detail. OnlyFans collected 20% of every transaction that passed through it, including those. Chapter 4. The walls close in. The financial system had been uncomfortable with OnlyFans from nearly the beginning. Metrobank had shut down their accounts without warning in 2019. It was the first sign of what would become a recurring pattern. Banks and payment processors deciding, one by one, that the reputational risk of processing adult content outweighed the revenue it brought in. But here's where it gets worse. In 2021, MasterCard announced a new policy requiring any platform hosting adult content to verify the identity of every single creator and review every single piece of content before it was published. Every creator, every upload, without exception. The deadline was October 2021. For a platform running on 46 employees, this was not a compliance challenge. It was closer to an impossible one. On August 19, 2021, OnlyFans announced that from October 1st, it would no longer allow adult content on the platform. The business that had been built entirely on adult content was banning adult content to save itself from the banks. This shouldn't have been survivable. But then something unexpected happened. Creators and users, the millions of people on both sides of those transactions, pushed back publicly and loudly. Tim Stokely had been open with the media about the banking pressure driving the decision, and that transparency turned the audience into a pressure campaign aimed directly at the financial institutions. 6 days after the announcement, OnlyFans reversed it. New banking partners had been found. The ban was lifted. The platform had survived. But the episode had made one thing permanently clear. The entire business sat on a financial foundation that could be pulled out from underneath it at any moment by institutions that would never be fully comfortable with what OnlyFans was. Chapter 5. The Sale That Never Happened. By 2025, Radvinsky had been watching the horizon for a while. AI was coming for the platform in two directions at once, helping legitimate creators automate their work and eliminate the scammy agencies, while simultaneously producing entirely artificial creators that required no real people at all. A competitor had already reported that 15% of its revenue came from AI-generated accounts. The agencies were getting sued. Users were starting to understand the gap between what they thought they were buying and what they were actually getting. Radvinsky decided to sell. He put an $8 billion valuation on the business. By conventional software company metrics, this was actually a discount. A company generating $700 million a year in profit could reasonably trade at far higher multiples. The numbers made the case clearly. The business made its case less clearly. Because every pool of serious capital that looked at OnlyFans saw the same thing. The revenues were real, the margins were extraordinary, and the business was effectively untouchable for most institutional investors, who were prohibited by their own fund mandates from putting money into adult content platforms regardless of the returns on offer. The first deal, an LA private equity firm at $8 billion, collapsed. The financing couldn't be assembled. A second offer came in at $5.5 billion from a firm called Architect Capital. Smaller number, smaller firm, and by most accounts struggling to raise the money it needed to close up even that reduced deal. The most profitable internet business most people have ever heard of was sitting in a room full of buyers who wanted the returns but couldn't touch the product. And then something happened that changed how the entire story is read. Reports emerged that Leonid Radvinsky had died at the age of 43. Cancer was cited as the cause in public reporting at the time. After that news became public, some observers noted that the timing of the sale attempts, the urgency, the willingness to accept below-market valuations, the compressed timeline, looked different when viewed in that context. Whether that connection reflects reality or simply a pattern people read into events after the fact is something nobody outside that story can say with certainty. What the public record does show is that a man who had spent years building and extracting from one of the most profitable internet businesses ever created spent a significant portion of his final years trying to find someone willing to buy it, and never quite got there. What this actually means: a 10,000-pound loan built a machine that generated $7.2 billion in revenue, made one man $1.4 billion richer, and at its peak ran on a team of around 46 people, a ratio that by most measures made it one of the most operationally lean businesses in internet history. By every financial metric that matters, it was an extraordinary thing to have built. And it couldn't find a buyer at any price the owner considered fair. The hidden cost of OnlyFans was never the banking fees or the legal battles or the compliance pressure. It was the permanent ceiling that gets placed on a business the moment it builds its entire foundation on something the financial system will never be fully comfortable with. The money was real. The profits were real. The growth was real. But the moment Radvinsky tried to convert all of that into a transaction, the thing that had made it all possible became the thing that made it impossible to exit. He spent years extracting value from a business he couldn't sell. And what the public record shows is a man who spent a significant part of his final years trying to find someone to buy something he had built into one of the most profitable platforms on the internet, and never quite got there. But here is what the story leaves behind for anyone building something. Every shortcut that makes a business easier to build has a cost that shows up later. Sometimes in a courtroom, sometimes in a banker's office, sometimes in the gap between what your company is worth on paper and what anyone is actually willing to pay for it. The more those shortcuts compound over time, the harder it becomes to separate what the business is from what built it. And by the time you try to exit, those two things are impossible to untangle. The 10,000 pounds became $7 billion, and in the end, Radvinsky couldn't find a buyer at the price it deserved. What does it say about a business when the most profitable exit available is the one nobody is willing to touch?